Good afternoon, everyone. So, in the last lecture, we have discussed the shielding concept with single metallic barrier as a shield, double isolated metallic barriers as a shield, and multiple shields between the source and the receptor. More is the thickness of the shielding barrier. Obviously, it will offer more attenuation. The shielding effectiveness can be improved by increasing the thickness of the shield. A shielding using a single metallic barrier between the source and the receptor. This is multiple barriers, metallic barriers are there between source and receptor to improve the shielding effectiveness. And this is another approach where we are using double isolated shielding method, where we are using two metallic barriers between the transmitter and the receiver. So if you increase the number of the barriers, metallic barriers between transmitter and receiver, obviously shielding effectiveness can be improved. But at the same time, it will not only increase the size of the shielding, the weight of the shielding, but also the cost of the shielding casing. So increasing thickness of the shield material improves the shielding effectiveness in terms of the absorption losses and all, but it also increases the weight of the shielding casing and the cost of the shielding. Single shielding, we have discussed that this is not that good shielding, especially with electrical conductor. So if I replace this electrical metallic conductor by a magnetic material, a mu material, it provides better shielding effectiveness. Why? So the reason is the mu materials that we have discussed in the last class. This is mu metal. Mu metals are the magnetic materials which has mu r value, relative permeability value, very high. So over here for mu metal, the value is 80,000. So the conductivity of copper is this, and permeability of the copper, that is relative permeability of the copper with respect to air, is this. That means mu r is 1 for copper. So the conductivity of the electrical conductor, which is copper, is compared with the different materials. So mu metal has a conductivity 0.03 times the conductivity of the copper. That means 0.03, you can round it off to 0.01 for simplicity. 0.01 means the conductivity of the mu metal is 100th as that of the conductivity of the copper. But the relative permeability of the mu metal is 80,000 times higher than that of the permeability of the copper. The relative permeability of the copper is 1 mu r. This is mu 0 will be always there, that is the absolute permeability. Mu is always mu 0 into mu r. So mu r value for copper is 1. So if we compare the relative permeability value of the mu metal, it is 80,000, and that means it is 80,000 times greater than the permeability of the copper. So for magnetic materials, the conductivity is decreasing, slightly less than the electrical conductor, but the permeability of the magnetic material is much higher than the permeability of the electrical conductor. So instead of electrical conductor, one should use magnetic conductors between source and receiver. Or here the source is there, which is generating electromagnetic waves. Electromagnetic waves are coming from this side, that is incidenting on the metal. Part of the signal is getting reflected and remaining is getting transmitted. Why the reflection and transmission is happening? That is because of the impedance difference of this medium, which is air, and this medium, which is metallic conductor. So what is the impedance of the air? We have discussed it, that is 377 ohms. And what is the impedance of the metal? That is under root of j omega mu divided by sigma. What is sigma? Conductivity of the metal. If you are using copper, the conductivity is very high. Mu is mu 0 into mu r. Mu 0 is 4.2 10 to the power minus 7, and omega is frequency 2 pi f. So conductivity is very high. Mu r is 1, that is minimum for copper or for electrical conductor. So the intrinsic impedance offered by electrical conductor is very low, because it is an electrical conductor. It should not offer any resistance or any impedance, but it offers some impedance. Ideally speaking, if the conductor, electrical conductor, is an ideal conductor, in that case the conductivity will be infinity. So any finite number divided by infinity will be 0. So if the electrical conductor that we are using over here as a shield, if it is an ideal conductor, the resistance or impedance offered by this conductor should be 0. But practically we can have good conductors whose conductivity can be in the order of 10 to the power 6. So it will offer some impedance, and that impedance will be very low, because conductivity is very high and mu r is just 1. Mu r is minimum. So therefore, the impedance of this shield is very, very low. It's a good conductor. And impedance of the free space is quite high, 377 ohm. So what happens because of that? Whenever there is an impedance mismatch between the two mediums, part of the signal coming from one medium gets reflected to the same medium and remaining is getting transmitted to the second medium. So the transmitted signal should be attenuated heavily, and that is possible with mu metal only. Why? Because what is the attenuation factor of a metal? That is under root of pi f mu sigma. What is sigma? Conductivity of the metal or magnetic conductor, which is little less than copper conductor. But mu value is very, very high. Mu is mu 0 into mu r. So mu r is much higher. Rate of increase in relative permeability of a magnetic metal is much higher than rate of decrease in conductivity of a magnetic conductor as compared to electric conductor. Therefore, alpha offered by the magnetic conductor will be very, very high as compared to the electrical conductor. Therefore, this wave gets attenuated drastically when traveling inside a conducting magnetic conductor, and very little signal will come over here. So instead of one magnetic material, one can use multiple magnetic materials also to improve the shielding properties or shielding effectiveness. Then we have also discussed the different types of shielding discontinuities. The bonds that we are using to prevent the leakage of energy from one surface to other surface also causes some of the losses. So that may happen due to the improper bonding and all. So these are the various types of bonds that are there, which are basically used for surface matings, or whenever there are irregularities in the surfaces, two conducting surfaces of a device. This kinds of conducting gaskets we can use to avoid the leakage of energy through that space. So this is the conducting gasket we can see over here, which is used to avoid the leakage of energy that could happen from this particular passage. So this conducting gaskets also offer some EMI. So we have discussed this scenario. We have source of EMI over here. This is the shield. This is the shielding panel, and this is the conducting gasket, which we have connected with the shield and shielding panel so as to avoid this leakage of energy over here. But what happens? Let us say the source is dipole. So dipole is radiating energy like this. So some of the current will induce into the shield, and that current will go through the shielding panel through this conducting gaskets. And the shielding panel, two shielding panels placed on the two sides of the shield, will start radiating energy that will act like a dipole antenna. And again, the electromagnetic waves are going to the receiving device, and that may affect the performance of the receiving device. So that should not happen. So that is another limitation of the gasket. So we have also discussed the discontinuity that is happening because of the holes that are there in the shielding barriers. We are deliberately incorporating holes into the shielding barrier in order to have ventilations and in order to see what is happening inside the device for air circulation and all. The holes are placed on the conductive shields. The shield with smaller holes, the hole diameter or the aperture area of the hole where it is much smaller than the wavelength. Instead of aperture area, you should consider the linear dimensions of the aperture. If the linear dimensions of the apertures are much smaller than wavelength, this is how the E and H field will penetrate through the hole. And if the hole aperture or the dimensions of the peripheral dimensions of the aperture, if it is large enough or if it is comparable to wavelength, then this is how the energy will leak through the hole. So this is with single hole. If I have multiple holes on the shield, obviously lot of energy will penetrate through the shield inside the shielding where your receiving device is placed, and that will affect the performance of the receiving device, and that will reduce the shielding effectiveness. Therefore, one should calculate the effectiveness of the shielding from the diameter of the holes point of view. So if I have a single hole inside a shield, then the hole diameter should be within lambda by 50 to lambda by 20. Please remember, lambda, that is nothing but the wavelength over here is with respect to the highest operating frequency of the device. And for wavelengths greater than 2 times the maximum hole diameter, the shielding effectiveness is given by this expression. So this is very, very important expression. The shielding effectiveness for those wavelengths which are greater than 2 times the diameter of the hole that we are placing on the shield, where d is nothing but the diameter of the hole and lambda is wavelength at the highest operating frequency of the device. So shielding effectiveness, how the shielding effectiveness varies with the diameter of the shield. When the diameter of the shield is lambda by 2, when the diameter of the shield is lambda by 2, what will happen? When d is equals to lambda by 2, this is lambda by 2 divided by lambda by 2 will be 1. So it will be 20 log of 1, that is 0 dB. So shielding effectiveness is 0 dB. That means whatever is there on this side of the shield, everything will come out on that side of the shield, and that is going to the receiver. That means the shielding is not at all providing any protection to the receiving device when the diameter of the hole is lambda by 2. In that case, the shield aperture, the dimensions of the hole, acts as a lambda by 2 antenna, lambda by 2 long antenna. That's why whatever energy is there on this side of the shield is getting transported to the next on the next side of the shield. That is not a good thing. And when d is lambda by 4, I'm reducing the diameter of the hole that is placed on the shield to half now, lambda by 4. What will happen? Lambda by 2 divided by lambda by 4 is 2. So 20 log of 2 is nothing but 6 dB. 6 dB means 1/4 of the signal that is there on this side of the shield is going to this side. So still it is not providing you good shielding. When d is lambda by 8, when d is lambda by 8, so it will be 20 log of 4 and so on. So we'll get different values of shielding effectiveness: 0 dB, 6 dB, 12 dB, 18 dB and 20 dB for different values of diameters of the holes. When diameter of the hole is lambda by 2, lambda by 4, lambda by 8, lambda by 16 and lambda by 20. These are the shielding effectiveness offered by this single shield. So if I have multiple apertures on the shield, the shielding effectiveness of such a shield is given by this. It is very similar to this. The only difference is this factor is added over here. More the number of the holes on the shield, less is the effectiveness. So this is subtracted from this particular equation. So the shielding effectiveness of a multiple shield with multiple holes is less than shielding effectiveness of a single hole. So a shielding effectiveness of about 100 dB can be achieved by properly calculating the dimensions of the holes. We'll talk about it. So here we can see the multiple shields are there. Sorry, multiple holes are there on a shield, and this is the thickness of the shield, and the diameter of this hole is, let us say, d. So these holes we are deliberately placing on the metallic shield in order to pass the air, hot air, from inside to outside the shield, so as to protect the device from heating losses. Or for ventilations and air circulation also, one can place these holes on the shield, or to see what is happening inside the device also, these holes are deliberately incorporated on the shield. So here, if the thickness of the shield is large enough, these are the holes where copper is not there or where metal is not there. We have removed metal from that portion, so it is a hole, air is there. So this particular hole may act like a circular waveguide. A circular waveguide you have studied. What is circular waveguide? What is waveguide? It's a hollow metallic pipe that passes high frequency signal. Waveguides are also called as high pass filter. So waveguide has its own cutoff frequency that depends on the dimensions of the waveguides. So when I'm talking, the hole can be circular hole, it can be a square hole, it can be a rectangular hole, it can be any other type of hole. So for rectangular waveguide, if the thickness of the shield is very large and the holes are made in rectangular shapes, then all those rectangular holes will act like a waveguide. So those waveguides, for rectangular waveguide, what is the cutoff frequency? The cutoff frequency expression is 1/2 pi under root mu 0 epsilon 0 in bracket m pi by a whole square plus n pi by b whole square. So different modes are there in waveguide theory. So different modes have different cutoff frequency. Why waveguides are also called as high pass filter? Because they passes only those frequency signals through it which are higher than the cutoff frequency of the waveguide. So different modes have different cutoff frequencies. The modes can be TE mode or TM mode. So TE mode can be again TE11 mode, TE10 mode, TE01 mode, and so on. TM mode again can be classified similarly, TE1, TM10, TM01, TM11, and so on. So different modes have different cutoff frequency that are based on the dimensions of the waveguide and the type of the mode. The mode that is having lowest cutoff frequency is called as dominant mode. So that means we have to design these holes in such a way that it should not pass the frequency signals that are the frequency of these waveguides, the cutoff frequency of these holes that are acting as a waveguides should be higher enough than the frequency of the noise signal or electromagnetic interference coming from the source. If the cutoff frequency of this waveguide is higher than the frequency of the electromagnetic interference coming from this source, then that signal cannot pass through this waveguide. And you know how the signal is passing from the waveguide? By total internal reflection. So we have to design this hole in such a way that the cutoff frequency of these holes which are acting as a waveguides is higher than the cutoff frequencies of the electromagnetic noises coming from the surrounding equipments, so that no signal penetration will be happening through those holes, and the device which is placed on the other side of the shield, that is receiving device, will remain safe from the electromagnetic interferences. So all right. The similar concept can be again applicable to the honeycomb air vents, wherein we are having multiple hexagonal holes inside a shield. So these kind of shields are again required in many of the RF equipments. So what is the problem over here again is very similar to the previous case. So these hexagonal holes having thickness quite larger as compared to the diameter or width of this hexagonal cell. So this hexagonal cell acts like a hexagonal waveguide. So in this case, what we can do, we can assume this hexagonal waveguide as a circular waveguide, because hexagon is approximately equals to circle, we can say, and we can do the approximation and we can do the calculations of the shielding effectiveness and cutoff frequencies, and we'll get a quite fair calculations. So to achieve the 100 dB attenuation from these kinds of hexagonal circular air vents, the thickness to the diameter of the hexagonal cell should have a ratio of 4:1. So it will offer 100 dB attenuation. 100 dB attenuation means if 1 watt of signal is there on this side of the shield, then the signal that is coming on this side of the shield will be 10 to the power minus 10 watts, or we can say it is 100 picowatts. That is very, very small. So that is quite fair shielding this shield will offer when the ratio of the thickness to the diameter or width of the hexagonal cell is maintained approximately to 4:1. So shielding effectiveness of such a shield with hexagonal air vents is given by this, where T is again nothing but the thickness of the shield, and D is nothing but the diameter of the hexagonal cell. Hexagonal cell we are assuming as circle only of diameter D. So if the hexagonal cells are roughly approximated by circular waveguides, about 100 dB shielding can be achieved up to frequencies given approximately by this relation. So you have to remember this condition. So next concept is bonding. So what is bonding? Bonding is simply to join two surfaces, just like a conducting gasket only, joining two surfaces by using a component which is having low impedance. So low impedance component can be any conductor. So we can use any conducting object to bond or to connect two different surfaces or two different objects or two different subsystems. So the joint is to maintain mechanical and electrical properties over an extended period of time. The purpose of this is to make the structure homogeneous with respect to the RF current flow. The RF current flow at different points on the shield may not be same, it may be different. So that's why bonding is required at multiple places, just like grounding. So how to achieve this bonding? There are multiple ways using which one can achieve the bonding. Simply by joining the two metallic surfaces to two metallic objects by using a conducting wire through welding or through brazing. Brazing means it's a process in which an alloy of zinc and copper is used at high temperature to join two metals. So we can use either welding or brazing to join the two metallic objects. That is one type using which one can achieve the bonding. Other type is metallic surfaces through fasteners or by direct metal to metal contact. So if I have two metals, I'm not welding them, I'm not fusing them together. That is not a permanent bonding. The bonding that is achieved by the process of welding or brazing is kind of permanent bonding. But the bonding that is achieved using fastener method, that is not a permanent bonding. Where fastener means they are applying a huge pressure on one of the surface so that the two metals that are to be connected will remain in contact with each other. So that is another way of achieving the bonding. The third type is bridging two metallic surfaces with a metallic bond strap. So if I have two metallic surfaces like this, and if I want to connect them, so I can simply use one conducting wire to connect these two metallic surfaces. I'll solder this conducting wire at this point also and at this point also, so that the two metals will remain interconnected. They will have electrical connectivity. So I'll show you some of the examples for this. You can see this is how a metallic wire is used. The wire can be of different shapes. We'll talk about it. That is connecting the enclosure of the equipment with the ground. So that is the third technique using which one can achieve the bonding. The factors that influences the EMI performance of the bonding are generation of intermodulation products because of nonlinear effects at contacts between similar and dissimilar metals. Obviously, whenever there is a difference in the two metals that we are joining together by bonding process, the change in resistance, change in properties of those two conductor materials may generate some EMF, and that may affect the performance of the bonding. So development of potential differences caused by DC and AC resistances and inductances of the given length of a bond strap. Bond strap is nothing but a conducting wire that we are using to connect two surfaces or two metallic objects. We'll talk about this in detail in coming slide. The adverse impedance response because of resonance of inductance and residual capacitance of bond strap. The second point and third point we'll discuss in detail in coming slides. How this two will affect the performance of the bonding. So as I have mentioned, bonding can be a permanent bonding or it can be a semi-permanent bonding. So permanent bonds are generally achieved using welding, brazing or soldering. However, soldering is not recommended. Soldering will not give you good mechanical strength to the device. So either welding or brazing is preferred for to achieve permanent bonds between two devices. The semi-permanent bonds are bolted connections that provide flexibility and accessibility. There are devices where nut and bolts are there. We require to remove the connections and again do the connections many times. So in those cases, we should go for temporary bondings. So fastening is a method wherein we are applying a lot of pressure on one of the surface of the conductor to connect the two surfaces together. The pressure should be within this range. So these are the bonding wires that are used to connect, or bonding straps that are used to connect two metallic enclosures or two metallic objects. Jumper, you can use simply a cylindrical conducting wire to connect two metallic enclosures or two metallic objects. You can use bonding straps also, which is braided one, you can see, or you can use a simple bond strap like this. What happens if I'm using this particular wire to connect the enclosure of an equipment with the ground? This wire will act as an inductance because this wire offers some inductance. Whenever current is flowing through this wire, what will happen? It will produce magnetic field, and that magnetic flux linkages per unit current gives you inductance. So it offers some inductance, and at the same time, this is a conducting wire, cylindrical conducting wire. It will offer some resistance. And what is the resistance offered by the cylindrical wire? The resistance offered by the wire is rho L by A. What is rho? Rho is the resistivity of the conducting wire. L is the length of the conducting wire. A is the area of cross section through which current is flowing. And at the same time, some capacitance will form between. Over here, it is air is there. So this is connected to a metallic enclosure of your equipment, and this is ground. So some capacitance will form between this lead. So that is a residual capacitance, a parasitic capacitance. So when I'm adding a connecting wire to achieve bonding, indirectly what I'm doing, I'm adding this circuitry between the enclosure and the ground plane, because that conducting wire offers some resistance, which is rho L by A. It offers some inductance. The inductance offered by the wire depends on its length and also depends on the frequency of excitation, frequency of the current that is going through it. And our residual capacitance is also appearing between the ground and the enclosure. So this is giving you parallel LC combination. So when I'm placing this wire between the enclosure and the ground to achieve bonding, it is equivalent to placing L and C in parallel. Obviously resistance will be there. I am not considering resistance at this point of time. So when L and C are in parallel, what will happen? It's a resonance circuit. And what is the impedance versus frequency of a parallel LC circuit? We know impedance is maximum at the resonance when the L and C are in parallel, and impedance is minimum when L and C are in series at the resonant frequency. So this is the resonant frequency at which the impedance of this circuit, which is equivalent circuit of a bond strap or conducting wire that we are using to connect enclosure with the ground. So it offers a maximum impedance at resonant frequency. So what will happen because of that? At resonant frequency, this particular wire will have very, very high impedance or maximum impedance, and this wire will act like an open circuit. So as if there is no physical connection. They are connected physically, but it will act like an open circuit. So current will not flow through it. So it should not happen. So what is the resonant frequency of parallel LC circuit? Whether it is series or parallel LC circuit, resonant frequency is always 1/2 pi under root LC. Resonance is a condition at which XL and XC are equal. So when XL is equals to XC, calculate the frequency. XL is J2 pi FL, that is equals to XC, that is 1/J2 pi FC. So calculate F. F will comes out to be 1/2 pi under root LC. So resonant frequency at which the impedance offered by this connecting wire is maximum. So resonance of this connecting wire should be as high as possible, resonant frequency, or resonant frequency offered by this bonding strap should be much higher than the resonant frequency of the equipment, so that I'll be having maximum impedance at very, very high frequency, which is higher than, or that frequency is higher than the frequency of the equipment. So for those frequencies, this will act as an open circuit, but for lower frequency, we'll be having very low impedance. At lower frequency, we are having low impedance, so high current can flow through it. So we should shift the resonant frequency of the bonding strap. So how to shift the resonant frequency of the bonding strap? Instead of using a conducting wire, we can use a bond strap, because R, the resistance offered by the wire, is inversely proportional to area. So larger the area offered by the conducting wire, smaller is the resistance, because R is inversely proportional to area of the conductor. Larger the area, lesser the resistance. So in case of bond strap, we can see the area is larger, so it offers less resistance, and at the same time we know thin wire offer more inductances. So this is it's just a conducting wire which is in the form of strap having larger width, so it offers quite less inductance. So one can reduce the resonant frequency either by decreasing the L or by decreasing the capacitance. So L can be decreased by choosing the length of the wire as small as possible and by increasing the width of the wire. So here we are using bond strap instead of using a cylindrical wire. So using a strap, it reduces resistance. At the same time, because of the use of the strap, it reduces inductance also, because inductance, the strap has larger width, thinner wires offers more inductances, therefore inductances decreases, and therefore the capacitance will increase. Therefore inductance increases, therefore the resonant frequency will increase. So resonant frequency offered by this bond strap will be much higher than the resonant frequency of the equipment. So this particular wire will be acting as an open circuit at very high frequency, or that frequency is much higher than the operating frequency of the equipment. So it is not going to affect the performance. So please remember, the impedance at high frequency is not just resistance. Impedance offered by this conducting wire is not just resistance. We have discussed this. It is offering certain inductance also, and that inductance is of two types. That is L external and L internal. The L external impedance is inductive impedance is the inductance generated by the external field that is there surrounding to the magnetic field, and L internal is the internal inductance which is generated due to the magnetic field that is there inside the conductor. So the formulas for the external and internal conductances are given over here. Concept of skin depth is coming over here. I'm not explaining these concepts in detail. Actually, these are very important, but it will take a lot of time to explain. So still I'll try to explain these things in brief. The DC resistance at low frequency or DC frequency, current flows throughout the conductor cross section. So if a radius of the conductor is say small a, then what is the resistance, DC resistance offered by the conductor of length L and resistivity say rho? It is rho L divided by A. A will be pi into A square, small a square, where small a is nothing but the radius of the conducting wire. But when I'm exciting the same conductor by an AC signal, for AC signal, what happens? Skin effect concept will come into picture. If you go on increasing the frequency, the current will tend to flow towards the skin part of the conductor. At low frequency, current is flowing throughout the conductor cross section. That's why A we have considered as area of the cross section of the conductor for DC resistances. For AC resistances, the current will appear on the skin part of the conductor. So the area in this case for AC should not be pi a square, but it should be the circumference of the conductor, that is 2 pi r, into some small depth delta, which is nothing but the skin depth. Please remember, A is nothing but the area through which current is, area of the conductor through which current is flowing. So RAC you can calculate simply by rho L divided by this A will be for AC resistance 2 pi a, small a, which is radius of the conductor, into delta. Delta is the skin depth. So that is the AC resistance. If you simplify that expression, you will get this expression. So what I wanted to tell you is DC resistance is independent of frequency, while AC resistance is dependent of frequency. So the inductance, simple straight wire is also offering some inductance, and that inductances are of two types, internal and external. So this is internal inductance, which is dependent of frequency, and external inductance is independent of frequency. So this inductance value should be decreased by choosing a proper bond strap, a bonding wire. Instead of using a cylindrical conducting wire, if I'm using a bond strap, that will reduce the inductance value significantly, and that will increase the resonant frequency significantly, so that it will not affect the bonding process. These are some of the guidelines that are given for achieving good bonds. You just go through it